Hey everybody, how you guys doing? Hope you guys are good and bad, or else you may be dead. So today we are going to do Indian philosophy and Hinduism. This is also a core lecture for Buddhist philosophy on Kanada. Not the country, but the Indian philosopher with a K, the Hindu philosopher who is one of the two major logician cosmologist figures of Hinduism who is very concerned with atoms. He may be one of the first atomists in human history, much like the atomists of ancient Greece. And he is someone who then feeds into the Nyaya, which I'm going to do next, which is the logic school. Gautama of the Nyaya is very much the Aristotle of India, and all of that is very important to me as history of logic. So Kanada is actually, in a certain sense, an atomist and more of a physicist chemist of sorts, but at the same time he is someone whose work goes into the sort of Aristotelian-ish work of Gautama, so he is very important to cover before covering Indian logic, even though technically he is not specifically the logician. He is somebody arguing philosophically about cosmology, what many would consider to be early proto-science. So Kanada is the founder of the Vaisheshika school, and his name means one who eats grain, but it could mean one who gathers particulars or particles into larger groups, the Vaisheshika, and he was one of the first atomists, and again, a logician in that he is the precursor to Gautama. He was also known as the owl, Uluka, and the legend was that he was so ugly in appearance, he is not often depicted as so ugly, that he frightened young women, so he ventured out at night, sneaking into granaries to eat corn and rice grain particles. Another story is Shiva taught him in the form of an owl. Vaisheshika also means particular, but also particle, atom, particular, special, specific, and distinction. A simple word that would have all of these connotations in talking about many particulars gathered up into groups of the human body, salt, cows, and then this is the sort of stuff of Aristotle, Gautama, and logic of the ancient world. Notice that one story, well, these are all stories that seem to tell stories of how he got his names, but also could be allegorical that he is a logician and likes to observe and gather observations into piles of observation rather empirically, gathering particulars into larger groups of data sets, etc. So Gautama's Nyaya school, who study logic and debate, borrowed much from their school. You really have to study the Vaisheshika before you study the Nyaya. You really should, because there's just so much there that then is directly borrowed into the Nyaya, who must, it is figured and recorded as, came just after the Kanada and Vaisheshika. So Kanada was more about cosmology. He's more about how does nature work, like the Milesian philosophers of Miletus, of the early Greek philosophers of that era, who were living right around the same time. People sometimes cut people's dates earlier and later. I'm not going to be one to tell you exactly who came first or second, but some put the Indians first, some put the Greeks second. To me, it looks like the Indians are slightly ahead, but honestly, people don't know the dates very well, and there were atomists of the world, and there may have been atomists in Egypt, or who kept that rather secret, and then you find atomists in Greece and India who are making arguments that may have come earlier but weren't recorded earlier. So we know there were atomists of the ancient world. Kanada is the great atomist and early philosopher, proto-scientist, cosmologist of India, of the Hindu, specifically in the Indian tradition. The Vaisheshika is considered an orthodox philosophical school of Indian thought, of Hinduism specifically, one of the branches. Gautama's Nyaya school, the more logic-oriented school of debate, like Aristotle's Organon and those works, they are more interested in what one can learn about the cosmos and human behavior, but what can be debated about fire and argued with what forms of logic, syllogistic sorts of forms. So Aristotle was into all of this kind of thing, and Kanada and Gautama are clearly interested in human argument and the cosmos. All of these three thinkers of India and Greece would be interested in all of that, as would many other philosophers of Greece and India. So that's essentially Gautama and Aristotle would argue that if you've seen many cows have horns, you can thus assume with some possible problems they discuss that all cows have horns, and then if you know all cows have horns and you know that there's a cow, Steve, then you know that there has horns, Steve, and you may as well prepare for the horns, Steve. That's pretty much how logic, that's logic, as Tweedledee or Dum says to Alice. And yes, that is, they argue about cows, and Kanada and Gautama have as an example that cows have a dewlap. I did not actually know at first what a dewlap is because I am not an Indian cowboy. But I found this out, that a dewlap is actually a wattle is a bifurcated dewlap. So a turkey or a chicken, a rooster, has, a wattle, which is kind of various and stuff, and a dewlap is the, cow underhanging neck thing. I did not know that. And again, Indian cattle have pronounced dewlaps. I stupidly thought it was actually the hump on the back of the Indian cow's neck, and I actually think I taught a semester or two saying that and didn't even look up about the cows because I don't deal with cows, and I've yet to be to India. Want to go, but have not been. So I don't know yet, empirically, if Indian cows have horns, as the Vaisheshika and then Nyaya would discuss. Yes, I have not have testimony, or witness with my eyes in my life yet of cows in India, no matter how sacred they may be. So Kanada argued there are many objects of knowledge, including substances such as air, water, fire, earth. We have traditional elements. We also have, as equal as those elements, materially, it seems, as substance, ether, which is a kind of element that sticks elements together. Isaac Newton believed in something like this, and that's why I think it's translated as ether here. But we no longer believe that there is an ethereal element that sticks other elements like fire and water together, or fire to fire. But that seems to be what he's saying, but again, that is something that scholars still, it seems. Time, space, which are substances to Kanada, self, and mind. So mind, something like awareness, and self, something like ego, perhaps, which is a pseudo-Greek word, a Greek word, but one that Freud is using for Austrians, is simple enough, is that, so self, this reminds actually of Bodhidharma. Many Zen people read these texts and know of these texts and many things about it. Bodhidharma, wonderfully, and I do love to say, and I've never said it in conjunction with this exactly, that the tallest thing in the cosmos is the self, and the widest thing is the mind. You actually have here that self and mind, which is more like width of awareness and wisdom, as opposed to self, which is something more like knowledge, like I know, I'm me, and then you have width, which is like, oh, I know, I don't know, and I have width out this way. You can sort of get around the ego anytime you want. Something like that. It seems like that's already here a little bit. Time, space, self, and mind are substances, quite material. And yes, I don't know of how they interact here, and in fact, I'm pretty sure that was some interacting substance outside. Yes, a little bit shaky. The ways that these interact, of course, you could get esoterically into the text, and even then scholars, modern folks of India are confused because these are ancient understandings, and it was esoteric, yet written down publicly enough in these texts, or shared enough, whether public or private, which doesn't really apply, so much at this time entirely, that yes, they essentially, it's not sure, other than the strange things in the text, how these interact. So these are all composed of particles or atoms. They that are eternal and uncreated. I was just going over Parmenides and the Eleatic Challenge for the Greek philosophy class, and atomists tend to believe that there is something like void, and much like self and mind, actually, is that there's something like positive substance, and then there's something like void and non-being. And Parmenides says motion is impossible because how could non-being be? Therefore, only substance and isness is, and non-being and motion are illusion. If you have being and non-being together, though, you have time, space, self, mind, something like this, although I don't know how time is exactly like self or substance. But yes, that there's something here such that you can have many different ways of these things combining, and that, yes, anyhow, it is, it's quite fantastic to consider, And that all of these things, in moving in this void, the idea that I was working towards is you have substance, which is being, space, which is non-being, and those two are primary opposites in some kind of way. And Parmenides really does, and other Greek philosophers with the Eleatic challenge, think being has to be fixed. So in a certain sense, like passing cars, you can't have things arise and then... Well, if something is eternal and unchanging, then these atoms are eternal and unchanging, which is why they're fixed things of being. If any being is fixed at all, the reason one is an atomist is because there must be a level to which being is fixed, and then it is fixed at that level completely. We now break apart the atom, so in fact we shouldn't call atoms atoms anymore, as mentioned in the Parmenides and others. Because once you have an atom, and once it's a tom, not an atom. It's a split, banana or otherwise. So... Kanada, actually here, it does not say exactly that he is arguing precisely this, but the atomists around this time in Greece are arguing similar to this schema, that you have being and non-being, and that this splits being, very male-female paired in the ancient world, that is something that is primary pairs of things. So these atoms are eternal and uncreated, is what we're told, and that would be why, is because they're moving in the non-being as permanent being, which is how any substance can have any isness to it. They believe they've broken down being to its primary, uncuttable, indivisible element, which now atoms, non-cuttables can be cut, unfortunately, in spite of our continued use of the word. Just like elements are not the primary elements, because we can split them into other elements and other such. Although, again, I'm happy to be lectured about how I don't understand the precise use of the terms. But yes, that is, it does seem like atoms and elements are sort of fossilized in the history of science and aren't necessarily the most precise words, nor do they need to be, because that's not how language pragmatically functions. But anywho's, so we have here that attributes, he gets into a great deal of what turns into a kind of Aristotelianism in Gautama. You have attributes such as quality, like color, texture, odor, taste, and quantity, such as number, measure, distinction, conjunction, and disjunction. Actions, karma, such as kicking somebody, that they feel pain and you're later reborn a cockroach. Generals, such as the group of all cows or rainstorms, all rainstorms. Particulars, such as individual cows or rain clouds. Inherences, which is a particular thing adhering in a general group. All of this is very basic Aristotelian logic. Kanada almost certainly lived a bit before Aristotle, but then again, Aristotle is relying on the kindness of Plato and assorted strangers. So, in Greece, in public places. So, essentially, you have something like the general, which is the universal group of all cows, the particular, which is this particular cow or this group of cows, and if you know all cows have horns, then you know that this particular group and each particular group of each particular individual of the particular group has horns because logic, because argument. If you can argue all this, all that, you can chain these things together in forms. Kanada does not say this here, but Gautama does. Gautama, they're essentially the same name, but one of them is typically used for the Buddha, and the other one for Gautama, darn it. Both are used again. They are both from the same exact region of India, which is why that is the same name. I should be consistent and say Gautama, and then I try not to use that name for the Buddha, although that can be difficult, given text. So... finally, you also have emptiness. There are 7 objects of knowledge, and those are substance, attribute, action, general, particular, inherence, which is the general and the particular a la logic, and emptiness, non-being, is an object of knowledge, non-being itself, pure emptiness. I have a good friend, Justin, who I always say likes to study nothing at all. And of course he does thoroughly with Zen and German thought and all sorts of other awesomeness. So yes, hey to him. And yeah, that would be non-being as a scientific object of knowledge, which of course it sort of is, according to cosmologists, I would suppose. Non-being itself is something one would contemplate in relation to other things, I suppose. You'd have to. But yes. So Kanada argues action belongs to one substance, not many. Now, this is a very important point, and for the Buddhist philosophy class, this is a very interesting point that will come up again in Buddhism and will mention that you have a very famous Buddhist Zen koan of what is the sound of one hand clapping? What is the sound of continuous cars going by? There's been a lot of them. I should have shut the window. Yes, karmic action. I have a thought. I close the window. I have a cat. Hey guys. How you guys doing? I won't parade them in front of you right now, but they're staring at me, probably wanting some kind of treat. Well, that is an object of knowledge. Yes, treats, non-being, the non-being of particular treats right now, and the emptiness of time itself, for us and for the cats. So, the sound of one hand clapping, though, is possibly against Hindus and against Hindu debaters who would be Kanada's Vaisheshika school and Gautama's Nyaya school, who were debating the Jains and the Buddhists at the time, as the Buddha is debating the Jains and others, and Jains are debating others. They're all arguing about how substances, air, water, fire, come together temporarily to form mortal human beings, and then what happens to the light and the fire that's your soul or yourself, or how does all of that work in your mind. And as they're talking about this, Kanada says here that action belongs to one substance, not many, and he goes on to say that only one thing can cause one other thing. So he is very much saying A causes B, and only there is one cause of A to every B. Well, anyone who's familiar with a butterfly flaps its wings, etc., understands the sort of Buddhistic, quasi-pop Buddhistic idea that if a butterfly flaps its wings, you could have a hurricane, but anything else, and it's not just the butterfly, it's everything and the butterfly causes the hurricane. So one thing doesn't cause other things. That's very Buddhist and Jain to say, and very Buddhist in particular, to talk about codependent arising, that many things cause each individual thing. I always like to say, and again, I am decently lefty, Hillary Clinton wrote a book called It Takes a Village to Raise a Child, all of these, figures controversial, and then a Republican strategist guy wrote a book called It Takes a Village to Raise an Idiot, which I think everybody on all sides of the political spectrum are probably feeling right now, in various angry ways. So much love, and happiness, cuddles, but yeah, essentially, what these schools are debating amongst themselves is, can one thing cause another thing? And actually, if you think about it, this is two things causing a temporary sound, and a temporary sound is something like an individual ego or a temporary human mortal being. If the Buddhists are arguing that we in our minds are impermanent, not that we're not part of something larger necessarily, because Buddhists tend to believe that we're part of something larger. Yeah. But they, I'm going to try to focus the camera actually on the cats, just because we're going to, yes, may as well say hey. Hey, guys. Yes. Anywho's it, that's just a momentary distraction of material reality, of course. So if you have what is one thing causes something, it's like, well, one hand does not clap. And that's also not only subjectivity, objectivity. You have impermanent meaning of subjective and objective together, which is very Buddhist. But one thing causes one thing it's very Buddhist to say, but what is the sound of one hand clapping? And you sit there and like, but I alone don't create meaning clapping against the universe. I have to clap against the universe. And then you have some kind of meaning, which again gets rather gendered and other things like that. So yes, there's, what is this? One thing causing other things. It's cool to realize here, Kanada and Gautama are making a point of following one thing causing another thing. And Buddhists are going to say, now wait a minute, many things codependently, like these cats, and the screen door, which is supporting the weight of the cat at the moment, is that many things cause things to happen. Not just one thing causing one thing. Obviously, each of us is the product of parents, and two at least, and yeah, how else one person doesn't lead to another person? Or does one person lead to a whole science or a whole form of art? Not usually. It would be some kind of interaction. So you would have, what is the sound of one hand clapping? It ain't. And then if you're sitting there contemplating that, doing Zen, you would, and Zen people don't understand a whole lot more necessarily than you and I about Buddhism as they are sitting and studying and reading the texts. for the first time. So as we read the text and you think about someone sitting there thinking of this, Kanada and Gautama probably would have Buddhist primers or understandings of these kind of examples, and then they would know, these are the Buddhist responses to that. There you go. Impermanent existence as interaction of different things. This hand is impermanent, this hand is impermanent, and this sound is impermanent. Subjectivity, objectivity, human, meaning, interaction, life, all of the good things. Yes, and all the bad too. Darn it. So, yeah, that thing is a little minor point, and it's esoteric, and it's sort of trying... Kanada is also weirdly Newtonian, because he actually also argues that things in the Vaisheshika Sutra, that things move downward. Sutta would be Buddhist Pali. That Pali and not Sanskrit. That things move downward naturally, so things must have additional causes or forces to move sideways or upward, which is kind of Newtonian. And he also says that sound is impermanent. So he actually is arguing sound is impermanent and things move around. And that itself could be a critique of the Vedas. The Vedas are originally an oral tradition and sound. And in a certain sense, some of this Hinduism is suggesting in ways, and does more overtly in other texts, that the classic texts of a religion are themselves human and impermanent. There is suggestions of this in this text, and then in Upanishads and other texts of Hinduism. So Kanada says, as far as things moving sideways or upward or imperfectly, that smoke shows additional energy as it has fire in it, and fire moves the earth, presumably, and smoke upward, which is decently true, and water moves upward by the sun and fire energy in it, and then collects in clouds. This is all karma energy stuff. And then the fire is released as lightning, and the water comes downwards in cycles. So that's, learning that, and those sorts of basic proto-physics chemistry from observation of nature, which is very proto-Aristotelian, all of this, and it's different and similar in ways. Gautama is really the one I like to compare directly to Aristotle and with the logic, but that there are observations here that do seem, not only ancient, but also modern. The final idea being that he argues an arrow shot from a bow, and the Indians had arrows and had catapults before many, that flies first from cause and then from an inherent tendency to remain in motion, which is words of the text put into English by others, but it is thus, and people are purposefully, of course, translating it thus, is quite similar to Newton. So that is Kanada. Next we're going to do Gautama, and I think I'm going to close the window for that one, because we had some kind of convoy or three going by. So, existence is impermanent and interaction of many. And what is the sound of 2 or 3 hands clapping already? So have a good one, and I will see you guys never if you're watching this and on a computer. So yes, much happiness.